So the first question for you is what happens in our bodies when our circadian rhythm is out of sync?
Yeah, so there are quite a few things that you asked. What is circadian rhythm? What is being in sync? And what is out of sync? So let me break it down. So circadian rhythm, so the word itself means rhythms that last about a day. So then the first thing that comes to your mind is sleep. But the opposite of sleep is not being just awake, sleep and activity. And then when we sleep, we also tend to not eat, most of us, unless you wake up in the middle of the night and eat. So that's a different thing. But typically people don't eat. So then there is the fasting and feeding or eating cycle. So these two, sleep activity rhythm and fasting and eating rhythm, and that connection to day and night cycle, because there is the term day. So these three have to be in certain alignment, and I'll go over that. And that's when we say that, okay, so your rhythms are in sync. So your eating, fasting, sleep, and activity rhythms are in alignment with the day night or light dark cycle. So then the question is, why do we need these rhythms? These rhythms, well, the sleep wake or sleep activity is kind of the tip of the iceberg, and you see only a tiny part of the iceberg when it is above water. So similarly, there are a lot of things that cycle in our body, and if you pay a little bit more attention to your daily activity and lifestyle or rhythms, you'll see that you're more likely to have bowel movement in the morning, not in the middle of your night. And similarly, your hormone profiles change. So you're more likely to consume a large meal with carbohydrate without spiking your glucose dangerously high in the first half of the day than in the second half of the day or late in the evening. So similarly, if we dive deep, then we find that almost every gene, every hormone, every brain chemical, digestive juice, everything rises and falls at a certain time of the day or night. And these rhythms help us to do a few things. One is the anticipate time. For example, in the morning, in anticipating waking up, your stress hormone level, cortisol, begins to rise so that when you wake up, you feel more energetic. Similarly, anticipating going to bed, your melatonin rhythms begin to rise 2 to 3 hours before going to bed, so that as soon as you hit the bed, within few minutes you can fall asleep. So similarly, there are many things that happen in anticipation. Your heart rate goes up, your body temperature goes up or down. Second thing is it synchronizes different things that should work together. For example, during daytime you have to be more active and you should feel hungry, so those two things should go together. Similarly, at every level in the cell, for example, your mitochondria should be repaired at night and should be really humming and working more efficiently during daytime, when you are eating. So starting from single cell to whole animal or whole body, there are many things that should go together, should happen together. And the third thing is circadian rhythms also separate things that don't go together. So, for example, on a big picture, your bowel movement should not happen in the middle of the night when you're sleeping. And uh, so that is one example. Similarly, there are a lot of examples where the oxidative damage that happens to our body or to every single cell, and the repair enzymes that naturally cleanses the oxidative radicals that happen at the same time, so that we don't build up too much reactive oxygen species, or we don't damage our DNA and other stuff. So these are some of the benefits. And then you asked, how do we know, or what happens when these are out of sync? So it's always easy to define what is out of sync, because, for example, if you travel across 10, 12 time zones, then for the first 1 or 2 days you feel jet lagged. That means your brain is still in the old time zone. It's still feeling sleepy during the day. It's not in sync with the local time. And your body, since you have to get up, walk, go to some places, meet friends, or do your business, your muscle and your body is actually in the new time zone. So there is this sync out of sync that happens, and that reduces productivity, increases anxiety and distress if it is short term. But if it continues for many months or years, for example, if you are working the lifestyle of a shift worker where, for say, you work very late into the night almost every single day, and then on Saturday Sunday you are catching up and you are kind of coming back to regular life, then that can also put distress on your body and mind. So that increases risk for diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, for example, high cholesterol, and even ADSD, ASD for young children, to dementia and cancer for older adults.
Yeah, I mean, I think the example you brought up in the jet lag, where you travel from, let's say, an Eastern time zone to Asia time zone, where it's literally day and night, are obvious for the brain to think that you're in a different time zone. So you feel tired, groggy, not able to think. But for everyday people that just don't travel, but perhaps they sleep a little bit later, or their circadian rhythm is just a little bit out of sync because they're used to eating a little bit later. What are some of the other measurements, if there are any? Like, let's say, is there a way to have any biomarker measurements to get a clearer understanding to see if your circadian rhythm is a little bit out of sync?
Yeah, it's actually everybody wants to have a biomarker these days, and unfortunately, there is none that
Mm,
everyday people can use, because we are talking about rhythms. So that means you have to take multiple samples to come up with a marker saying that this is normal or this is abnormal. And another thing is, it's not that your body is in sync with outside world, but not your brain. So in that case, you need a you need to track something that tracks circadian rhythm in the brain and something that tracks circadian rhythm in the body. So
mm,
far, although many hormones, metabolites, etc., have a circadian pattern, many of them are also altered or affected by other factors. Simple example: cortisol peaks in the morning, goes down throughout the day, reaches its lowest level in the evening. But at the same time, if you are stressed, or if you are crossing the road and if a truck is coming towards you, then cortisol level will spike. Or if you're just stressed from work, that will spike. So then, even tracking cortisol rhythm becomes very difficult, because within a day, if there is any other stress that's altering your rhythm, then you may not know whether it's cortisol rhythm or something else. The only thing that seems to be very resistant to any perturbation but is very solid is melatonin rhythm. But unfortunately, throughout the day, our melatonin is pretty low, almost undetectable level, and only it rises around bedtime. So that means one has to take multiple samples throughout the night to get to know what is your melatonin rhythm. And even the melatonin rhythm will tell you what your brain is feeling, or how is the circadian rhythm in the brain. But actually, it doesn't say much about the rhythm in our gut, liver, etc. Because the point is, almost every organ in our body has its own circadian clock, and they all have to work in sync. So that's a challenge. But at the same time, when you're saying that a lot of us who sleep little late or eat little late, it's not a big deal, because it doesn't kill us. Or but then we got to pay a little bit more attention to what symptoms might be happening, occurring, that might explain that you may be out of sync. So, for example, for many teenagers and young adults, typically, circadian rhythm disruption for women will result in irregular menstrual cycle, the missing a period or delaying it, and irritable bowel syndrome, where they might go to the bathroom too many times. They may have difficulty focusing, concentrating, and getting in sync, like really paying attention to your circadian rhythm might reverse these symptoms, and then you know that, okay, so that might be causing it. And for many healthy adults, nearly 50% of adults now have pre-diabetes or diabetes. And it's very common, and very controlled experiments have shown that even if you take healthy young adults who are very normal, they have normal glucose level, and then reduce their sleep to 5 hours a night. If they habitually are in bed for 7 to 8 hours every night, you reduce their sleep to 5 hours every night, and then within a week or so, they become pre-diabetic. So then the question is it the widespread prevalence of pre-diabetes, is it partly due to circadian rhythm disruption that many young adults go through? So these are the questions. So if you have some of the symptoms, then maybe the first thing to test is whether your rhythms are out of whack, whether you're sleeping, maintaining sleep-wake cycle, sleep activity cycle, and eating fasting cycle, and also having enough exposure to light during daytime, not at night.
Yeah, because that last point about fasting, sorry, the number, reducing the quantity of sleep and that increasing pre-diabetic in
Yeah.
a study that talks about the quantity of sleep. And that's kind of one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about and differentiating that, because we often hear sleep more in order to improve every aspect of your life. You know, I have this Aura ring, and I've been starting to measure the quality and the quantity of my sleep. And oftentimes when I sleep really well, I'll have blue or green across all of the charts and measurements: REM sleep, deep sleep, quantity. And then my timing would just have like red, like bright red, because I often go to bed at like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. sometimes. And I just was so frustrated by that. And it's really when I started to pay attention to more about this idea of the circadian rhythm. So just going back, like we often hear the idea of sleep more, but is it better, or is it as important, maybe rather, to prioritize timing of when we actually sleep? So the circadian timing, even if the total sleep hours may suffer a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a difficult question because for different people it's different. For example, you may be feeling, maybe you are used to going to bed at 2 o'clock and waking up at maybe it's a 9 or something, whatever it is, and you can sleep very well. But then people who are going to bed at 2 o'clock and are waking up at 8 or 9 or 10 in a busy, noisy neighborhood with no air conditioning, then of course their sleep quality will become really bad. So that's why, if you can afford to, if you have a quiet house and you're living alone and no one is disturbing you, there's no dog, cat, small children, etc., you don't have to pick up, drop kids or pick up somebody in the morning, so that to going to bed at 2 and waking up at 9 or 10 is okay. But
Mm.
most of us actually do have a day job, or people are caregiving, means except for the young adults, for most other adults starting from the age of 30 and onwards, we are giving care to children or giving care to the elders, or we are paying attention, or we have a job. So then it becomes difficult to go to bed late and have enough quantity of sleep and also quality of sleep. So that's why, from practical point of view, for most people it may be better to advance that sleep time a little bit earlier, so that they can give themselves enough time, so that they are not waking up to like alarm clock and pressing the snooze button 5 times before dragging themselves out of the bed. Because when you're going to sleep, and this data is becoming very clear over the last 10, 15 years, that during sleep we cleanse our brain. So during daytime there are a lot of activities in our brain, and there are a lot of, you can say, toxins. I won't say toxin, but almost, it's better to describe it that way: dirt, toxin, whatever you can say, gunk, that accumulates. And literally during our sleep, when the neurons fire together, um, and one of our leading expert in sleep, they say neurons that fire together shower together. So that means when they
Mhm.
fire together at night, synchronized, that's when they produce this wave to cleanse the brain. So it's almost like the brain is going through a washing and drying cycle in your washer. And just imagine if you wake up to an alarm clock before the washing and drying cycle is complete, you're essentially waking up and putting on dirty clothes that are half dried for the next day. So that's the way to relate. Like when we don't sleep enough, you feel like that, and then to kind of whitewash that or to suppress that, we start our day with coffee, and then people swear by that coffee because when they say that that day cannot begin without coffee, that's a telltale sign that they are not getting sufficient sleep that rejuvenates their brain to the extent that they can actually drag themselves and start working or start emailing, doing something without a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and just to reiterate on that timing aspect. So, assuming let's say I go to bed at 2 a.m. and I have the flexibility to get 8 hours of sleep, so I can still wake up at 10 a.m., no alarm.
Good.
Is that technically a worse schedule than someone going to bed at 10 p.m. and getting the same 8 hours, but waking up at 6 a.m.? So it's the same quality of sleep,
Yeah.
well, same quantity, but just the circadian rhythm of the timing is different.
Yeah, I mean it's not always the world time, because the thing is, if you can do it every single day, then that's fine. Essentially, you are living in a different time zone, literally, right?
Yeah.
So I won't say that this is bad, because so the idea is if you can maintain a dark bedroom and go to sleep, say from 2 a.m. to 10 a.m., and then you're waking up without an alarm clock, and you're feeling perfectly fine and energetic, that's fine,
Mm.
because our circadian rhythms are actually entrained by or get in sync with our exposure to light during daytime or absence of bright light few hours before going to bed. So light plays a big role. And second thing is eating and fasting. So for example, if you wake up at 10 and wait an hour, and your first bite is after 11 a.m., and then your last bite is 3 to 4 hours before going to bed. So if you're finishing all your food by 10 or 11 at night without too much alcohol, then that still, I would say, is a relatively good, consistent circadian life. Because just imagine, suppose say you are stuck in a space station, what would you do? Will you stick to Houston time, or will you stick to whoever is funding your mission?
Yeah.
So
Space
that's
time.
the point. So that's the point. Just imagine you are in the space station and you choose a time. Can you stick to that time and maintain these three rhythms? Your
Mm.
light dark rhythm, eating fasting rhythm, and sleep wake rhythm, sleep activity rhythm. And if you can maintain in right relation to each other, just like I said, during daytime, after you wake up, say between 10 and evening 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., if you can go outdoor and get some daylight for an hour or so, then that will take care of your brain executive function, alertness, reduce depression, etc. And then the eating fasting rhythm, if you can maintain at the same consistency, then that's fine.
Yeah.
But
Um, you talk about the importance of getting light, especially in the moment that you wake up. And I think Huberman also talks about this a lot. And I think people kind of get it, but they don't really like see the impact of how much this kind of regulates the circadian rhythm. Talk to us a little bit about that, like the importance of getting bright light, natural light, and what that's actually doing. How is that actually impacting our bodies?
yeah, so every day our circadian rhythm. So, for example, if I lock you in your apartment without any timing cue and with plenty of food and everything else, you have no timing cue, then what will happen is you'll go to bed and wake up in every roughly 24 hours, 15 minutes, or 24 hours, 30 minutes. So that means our internal clock is not necessarily exactly 24 hours. So that, and the reason is from sunrise to sunrise outside the equator is never exactly 24 hours because of the tilt of the planet and then the elliptical route it takes, it's slightly different. So that means every day we are resetting our clock slightly. And that resetting cue comes from bright light mostly. Our brain clock and trends by bright light. So then the idea is how when you should get this light, or is it advisable to get in the morning versus daytime or evening? And what happens is our human circadian clock is a little bit or any circadian clock is a bit interesting because during daytime it actually expects light. So light doesn't do anything in changing the clock in the middle of the day. But in the very beginning of the day, like early in the morning or late in the evening, even around sunset and starting from sunset, say till you go to bed, light has a huge effect on resetting or resynchronizing our clock. So, in that way, one would argue that it's better to get up and get some light because that light syncs your brain clock with the day night cycle.
Mm.
Another reason is, if you're traveling and if you want to get over jet lag much quickly, then it's always better to get up and go outdoor, go for a walk or a mild run early in the morning because you get sunlight and also you are artificially cranking up your cortisol level because your cortisol level should peak around the time you wake up. By running outdoor and having some light, you kind of reset clock, both your cortisol rhythm potentially and then your circadian rhythm. And then the same thing might be true that in the early evening, like around sunset time, around that time, if you're outdoor and if you get some light, that also helps resetting. That doesn't mean that you should not go outdoor during daytime because light has multiple functions. One function is resetting the clock, but the other function that relates to most of us on an everyday basis is it improves or uplifts our mood. And a lot of us with stress and other things going in our life, as I said, most of us are caregivers. We spend more time worrying about other people or other things than ourselves. So there are a lot of reasons why many of us, almost 80% of us in our lifetime, will go through at least one episode of clinically defined depression or anxiety. And there are a lot
Mm.
of us who simply feel low or disinterested in what they do. And going outdoor, being under daylight, actually is the best antidepressant that everybody has access to. It's plentiful and free. You just have to step outside. So I would say that yes, if you can, then it's better to go outdoor in the morning after you wake up. You feel fresh. You feel like, yes, it's a new day and you can reset your brain clock. But at the same time, at any time of the day, if you can, be outdoor. You don't have to be sitting under the bright, full sunlight, but even under a tree canopy or next to a large window on the veranda, anywhere, if you can spend an hour, then that's also a good antidepressant.
Gotcha. So it's not necessarily you're saying about the sunlight exposure, meaning if you're living in rainy London, or I'm actually from Vancouver, where it's cloudy and raining a lot, you can just be in a window looking
Yeah.
outside, even though it's a cloudy day. Just as long as you're getting exposed to daylight, you're still able to reset that circadian rhythm.
Yeah, so when I said window, the problem is as you move away from the window, the daylight falls exponentially, very precipitously it falls. So you have to be essentially within a meter from the day from the window, large
Yeah.
window. But you are right. Even in Vancouver or London, in a cloudy day, in a rainy day, you still get 4 to 5,000 lux of light, and 1,000 lux of light for a couple of hours or 1 hour is considered enough. And when you are getting 4 to 5,000 lux of light in a cloudy day, that's plenty of light.
Mm. Yeah, noted. If you had 5 to 10 minutes to sit down with a group of late shift workers that, my mom used to work pretty late hours where she would work from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I've got a lot of friends that are working in an emergency room as doctors, and they often have to sleep by the time get home, which is going to be 10, 11 a.m., and they wake up at nighttime. So they're not able to actually get that natural light. And I'm sure you get this question a lot, but if you had this time to educate folks in terms of what are the actionable things they can actually do that will help reset their circadian rhythm if they're working late night hours, what would you advise?
Yeah, so the night shift worker are truly, I mean, they took the name away, but I would say the guardians of the galaxy, really, because the modern society cannot survive without shift worker. Just imagine from the time you wake up till time you go to bed, you must have received the service of at least a dozen shift worker every single day. And without them, life will be impossible. So thank you to your mom that she actually saved quite a few life. And so coming to shift worker, the really the most difficult shift work is the night shift in a place like Vancouver, or where the day length can be very short in winter time, so there is very little chance to get daylight. And I've talked to many shift workers, and one shift worker in particular who was a San Diego cop here, police officer for 25, 30 years, was always fit, very trim and fit, very uplifting mood. And I asked him, what is your secret? He said, he didn't even know what I work on. He said, I have the magic trick. Every day, whatever time I come back from work, I make sure that I wake up at least an hour before sunset. I just want to go and get some sunlight before it's out, because that's like my
Mm.
secret juice of energy. And sunlight is literally the energy that keeps me going. And it was kind of gratifying to hear that. But, the lucky thing is he lives in San Diego, so he can actually get sunlight even in winter time. So then, for challenging places like northern extreme latitude, the question becomes, how do you get access to light? Because in winter, by the time you come home, as you said, 8 or 9, and then you go to sleep, and by the time you wake up, it's in the evening again, dark. So this is where having exposure to daylight or daylight mimicking light, bright light, is a substitution. And in many Nordic countries, people actually go and get light therapy. That's 5 to 10,000 lux of bright light. And nowadays, there are many companies that are coming up with a wearable where there is a tiny LED that you can wear on top of your glasses that gives you this blue light, because out of the daylight, the blue light is the most effective in reducing depression, increasing alertness, and resetting our circadian clock. But at the same time, you have to expose to blue light at the specific time. And nowadays, there are a lot of ways you can get this light exposure. But the biggest challenge for people out there who are in technology field, my challenge to you is, can you come up with a daylight mimicking light bulb that is under $10? Because right now, most of the light bulbs that we use, mostly they use three LEDs. They don't really mimic daylight, because daylight mimicking LEDs cost now more than $1,000 from many suppliers. And that innovation will change the life of many, many people.
Are there any cheap alternatives you recommend? Products, brands that are fairly affordable, people can buy just to
Yeah,
keep
so
at
there
their
are
house?
some blue light emitting LEDs that you can wear on top of your glasses, which are less than $250. And these are not you are not actually looking at super bright light, because sometimes that glare can trigger headache in some people. So these ones, there are quite a few vendors now, and you can look up and find some of those. And even the US military is using some of those for redeploying the troops to reduce jet lag and also increase alertness and improve cognition, because sometimes the soldiers are actually stuck indoor in a bunker, right, away from daylight for obvious reason. So there are quite a few studies that have shown efficacy of these wearable, and sometimes you also see NFL or NBA players wearing them and trying to reset to the new time zone. So I usually don't talk on behalf of any manufacturers because the first thing is I have not tested their product. So unless
Yeah.
I test it, I can't vouch for them. So that's why.
Yeah, no, makes sense. If someone isn't able to get that sufficient amount of daylight during their day, what about the idea of supplementing with extra vitamin D? Because obviously you get vitamin D with sunlight. And I'm just wondering how much efficacy just supplementing with, let's say, 10,000 IU vitamin D when you're not getting enough sunlight exposure can have an impact. Because I've heard the same can be done with jet lag in terms of mitigating jet lag when you take a lot of vitamin D. Obviously, would love to kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I haven't seen any research that it does anything to rhythm
Okay,
because
interesting.
the pathway that resets our circadian clock has absolutely nothing zippo to do with vitamin D. Vitamin D is synthesized in your skin in response to light, sunlight, and light acts exclusively through only 5,000 neurons in each human retina. And they have absolutely nothing to do with vitamin D. Vitamin D does not play a role in light entrainment of the clock. It does not play a role in light effect on mood or depression.
Hmm, interesting. Okay, so it's not a substitution by any means.
Absolutely not.
Got it. Got it. Um, in terms of compensating for lost or poor sleep, if someone has a decent sleep schedule, but one day they're up at 2 a.m. and they're just not able to get enough sleep, are there any tips you would have on trying to help reset the circadian rhythm or any activities that they can do that allows them to compensate for lost or poor sleep?
Well, the thing is, you're synonymizing sleep with circadian rhythm, which is actually wrong because having lost sleep, you can just catch up, you can do catch up sleep. There is nothing wrong in that. And circadian sleep is only one part of circadian rhythm. And just losing one night of sleep or few nights of, like for example, if you're lying in the bed, you cannot sleep with in a dark room, that's not going to change your circadian rhythm. You just feel crappy the next day because you did not sleep. It's almost similar to not eating for few hours or gorging too much. It's not going to change your circadian rhythm or it's not going to change your mitochondria or anything in a big way. It's a discomfort. So what you're saying is if somebody cannot sleep well, yes, catch up sleep is much better, and then in the day if you can and get a little bit more daylight, because now there is enough studies showing that daylight exposure actually improves your nighttime melatonin rise, and nighttime melatonin rise correlates pretty well with ability to fall asleep and maintain sleep. So this is one, and then some people find exercising not too close to your bedtime, but maybe late afternoon exercise, and if you can combine it with outdoor lighting when it's lighted outside, then that also helps people to fall asleep. I mean, there's a huge list of 100, 200 things that people can do to improve their sleep. And it has to be kind of personally tailored because some people find taking a shower in the evening helps them. Some people find maintaining a complete dark room, quiet room helps them, whereas other people find they want a little bit of light and background music to fall asleep. So one has to really personally experiment with the sleep toolbox to find which tools actually help them.
Yeah, yeah. The quality of sleep is definitely personalized. 'Cause I have people that need a bathtub with soap bubbles and classical music with a nice book in order to fall asleep, and that's kind of their daily
Hopefully, they're
schedule.
not
So
falling asleep in the bathtub.
hopefully not. No, no, exactly right. Okay, that's important to note. What are what are some of the worst common habits that you found that people in the modern generation are doing that's harming the quality of their sleep?
Yeah, I mean, I would say circadian rhythm because for sleep, there you'll find plenty of people out there talking about sleep, staying awake, and the biggest thing is there was a time, many almost more than a decade ago, when Netflix CEO declared what is his biggest competitor. He said, "Sleep is my biggest competitor." So that means all the digital companies, they want to take away your sleep. Your human wakeful, you can be sold something only when you are awake. So all marketers out there want you to stay awake so that you can see their advertisement, you can see their entertainment, you can pay for it. So that's disrupting
Tough battle.
everybody's
Yeah.
rhythm. And it's the whole marketing arm versus you, and you got to decide how much entertainment and advertisement you want to consume. So that's the biggest challenge for young adults and a lot of people. Um, but I
So are you
guess
referring to like using technology at night, staying up, watching YouTube, getting blue light at night? Is that one of the worst offenders of common sleep
I mean, that's
deterrence?
something that one has to personally have some control over. And then other thing is the work pressure, because a lot of people, we are not, many of us are not working in 9 to 5 jobs. Work is almost 24/7 now, and you got to figure out how to balance that life. And when you don't sleep, and when you have random bedtime, then you also tend to eat at random time, and eating at random time seems to have way much more worse effect on your body than even many other things that we take for granted, or that we think that we can control. So that's why many years ago we started this concept of time restricted eating that started from my lab. The first studies were done in my lab on animals, and then we transferred them to and we tested them in humans. And this concept has become now popular as intermittent fasting, but the scientific term is time restricted eating. And what we find is even shift workers who do 24-hour shift work, they can adopt 8 to 10 hours of eating window and then fast for the rest of the time, and they can still maintain their mental performance and physical performance perfectly fine. And they also find it that they fall asleep much better, and they can maintain that sleep much longer.
Hmm.
And that was surprising because we always thought about sleep um, as a product of our stress, light exposure, etc. But then eating time to have such a huge impact on sleep, that was kind of unexpected. And not only that, eating within that 8 to 10 hours has multiple health benefits, from reducing the risk for diabetes or reversing, in some cases, pre-diabetes, to even now there are clinical trials or human studies being done to test the effect of timeless eating on cancer prevention, cancer prognosis or treatment, and then survivorship of cancer, dementia, Parkinson's disease, and obviously for obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. So, when we are thinking about health, it's very hard to find a completely healthy 40-year-old these days, because most of us, if you typically find a 40, 45-year-old, then they either have pre-diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or few or any other condition, or depression, anxiety. They're going through a lot of different issues. So if circadian optimization can benefit multiple conditions, then this becomes a new bedrock for healthy living. And the ideas are very simple. It does not need extensive testing, biomarker tracking, or even buying special food, buying special mattresses, or buying special anything. And the idea is very simple: to maintain a 10 hours or so consistent eating window, and then 14 hours or so consistent fasting, Of course, once in a while you can eat outside that window, but not regularly. And then trying to be in bed for 8 hours. Means when you try to be in bed for 8 hours, hopefully you will get 6 to 7 hours of sleep. And that should be enough for many people. And these simple things can transform health because it can actually affect, it can improve physical health, mental health, and also in some cases, recovery from injury. So there is nothing out there that can actually address multiple health conditions, improve performance, even among athletes. They can improve their performance and recover much better sooner from injuries by paying attention to circadian rhythms.
Yeah, that study you did with mice was very fascinating, where you gave them the same amount of calories, but just within a different window, and they turned out to be slimmer, healthier, um, for compared to the other, I guess, test class. And just to bring it back around the improving the quality of sleep and giving yourself enough time, what is it about eating late that is triggering us to have poorer quality of sleep?
Well, when we eat for our digestions and absorption of nutrient, a lot of blood circulation goes to the core, and there is something called postprandial thermogenesis. So that means our body actually produces some heat for this digestion absorption process, and it takes at least 4 to 5 hours for the food to be digested in the stomach, the second phase of digestion, and then it goes to intestine for further digestion. So that means when we eat very close to bedtime, body temperature is high postprandially, and that prevents us from falling asleep because for falling asleep, we need cooler body. Then the second thing is when we eat close to bedtime, that also overlaps with our melatonin rise because our melatonin begins to rise for an average person 2 to 3 hours before we go to bed. And melatonin, just like it makes our brain to sleep, it also makes our pancreas to sleep. So that means a pancreas doesn't release enough insulin in response to the carbohydrate that we eat in our meal. So as a result, our postprandial glucose can rise a little bit higher, and then in long term, it can lead to increased risk for pre-diabetes and diabetes, and also increased weight gain. And those who are trying to lose weight, again, studies have shown that people who eat earlier than later, they have much better chance in losing weight and maintaining that weight loss.
Got it. Um, you mentioned melatonin, and one of the things that I've done sometimes, especially when I travel, is to supplement with melatonin. I've heard doing it regularly can have some negative effects. Curious to get your thoughts on using supplementation for people that are trying to improve their quality of sleep, of melatonin specifically, and if you do, what the dosage amount is.
Yeah, so I don't work on melatonin, and it's also very person specific because there are some people who are very sensitive to melatonin. 1 milligram is enough for them to fall asleep, and for some, they need 15 milligram to get into the bed. So it's really difficult to say. And then another thing is consistent use and tracking of what are the adverse events you have heard because I don't know much about is there any adverse event. What I know is if you have too much melatonin in your system in the morning, then it can also affect your postprandial glucose because melatonin, and whether you are supplementing or whether your body produces, if it is in your system, then it can prevent the glucose-induced insulin release. And some people who are taking very high dose of melatonin, it's likely, although it's not again tested, that very few cases that are testing done. Some studies have shown that even people who are taking 5 milligram of melatonin at night, they still have more than highest amount of their natural body nightly melatonin level in the morning, and even till noon they can have substantially high level of melatonin. and whether that melatonin is impairing their glucose response, and whether in long run they will develop their risk for diabetes goes up. Those things have not been tested because these are some of the risks. Those are relatively low priority for funding agencies because they want to solve more serious health issues. So unfortunately, these kind of studies have not been rigorously done.
Yeah, those are some of the stuff that I've heard as well. The other one that I've heard, which I don't think has actually been tested, is the potential for the baseline need of your body of needing dopamine to increase if you're constantly fueling yourself with melatonin supplements. And as an alternative, if you're doing it on a regular basis, that tryptophan, which is a precursor to melatonin, might be a safer alternative. Um, Assuming you're having it with healthy carbs, because you need to pair those two in order for it to cross across your blood-brain barrier. But I mean, if you haven't done studies on that, we don't obviously have to
Yeah,
recommend that for
yeah.
people. Yeah,
No, I don't think there is enough any rigorous study on that tryptophan and other supplement.
yeah, makes sense. Um, so shifting to fasting and time restricted eating, obviously this is something that you've kind of pioneered with intermittent fasting, which is great that there's becoming a more of a trend now for a lot of people. One of the things that I've struggled with when doing IF is understanding like what is the right amount of time. When's the meal where I should be consuming most of my meals? I think from a societal perspective, we've always shifted to dinner becoming the largest meals, and just based on restaurants and how meal plans and menus are formed, it's just that dinner we've always assumed to be the largest meal. Is that, if you're looking at the circadian rhythm and the quality of sleep based on your research, should our last meal of the day be our largest, or should it be lunch or breakfast? If we're just looking at it from first principles.
Yeah, it's hard to say because even within our body, although our glucose response is much better in the first half of the day, we are programmed to feel more hungry towards the end of the day. It doesn't mean that late at night, just end of the day.
Mm,
But we have kind of taken it to extreme because if you're eating until say 8 or 9 or 10 and then going to bed at 11, then that's kind of a little extreme. Um, but if you can finish your meals at 6 or 7 p.m. and you are 3 to 4 hours before your bedtime, that means you are going to bed between 10 and 11, then that should still be okay. But again, what happens is late night dinner doesn't come only with dinner and main course, it also comes with dessert and alcohol and few other things. So the question is, well, indirectly, if you're eating late, if your eating window is such that you are having business dinner and large meals with friends and family, then your risk for consuming that extra alcohol and dessert, sweets, etc., which are not necessarily part of a healthy nutrition, actually goes up. So in that way, you may not be reaping the best benefit of time restricted eating.
yeah, that makes sense. Um, I don't know how much your work focuses on prolonged fasting beyond, the daily time restricted fasting for that 8 to 10 or 12-hour window. But if someone is doing a 3-day prolonged fast, or 5 days or 10 days for the ambitious, how does that affect their circadian rhythm? And are there steps that we need to take after an experience like that to try and reset it?
Yeah, I don't work on prolonged fasting because for obvious reason, because whatever I do, I want to make it translatable to wider range of people. So for example, I would say anyone from 10-year-old to 100-year-old can eat everything within 12 hours, but not everybody can do prolonged fasting over multiple days. What we have
Yeah.
seen is, at least in mice, because we can sample more regularly in mice, um, fasting over 24 hours actually dampens our mouse circadian rhythm. Dampens means there are not too many genes going up or down. They're just kind of in a maintenance mode. They're going very slow and low. And at the same time, I must remind that our master circadian clock, there are certain part of the brain that play a oversized role in our circadian rhythm, and those rhythms continue irrespective of whether we fast or we eat. So those rhythms continue, and those rhythms essentially keep us on track. And then when we break our fast, uh, typically, depending on whether you're breaking in the morning or afternoon, there will be a different response. But we don't know how that response actually affects the circadian rhythm in next day, at least in mouse model. But what we know is during this fasting, at least people tell, we haven't tested this in mice. People tell that they have terrible sleep on the day one fast because they're feeling hungry. Some of them might be having a headache. So obviously their sleep quality deteriorates on day one, and then day two and day three they tend to adapt.
Mm.
But there's very little information on how they break their fast and how it affects their circadian rhythm versus sleep. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's probably a fraction of the audience that would probably need advice around that.
Yeah.
One of the things I've still struggle with actually, and this is all related to circadian rhythm and also sleep, is needing to wake up to pee at night. And I think probably at this rate, I still get up 1 to 2 times a day, and I think a lot of people do
Hmm.
as well. Talk to us about the circadian rhythm of our kidneys and what is the time window that we should be drinking our liquids. I know you've done some research around sipping as well. After a certain point, talk to us a little bit about that, about how I can prevent peeing at night so I can improve my quality of sleep.
Yeah, you're too young to wake up at times.
My kidneys are fine, I think, but yeah.
No, I guess what you mentioned, because you are going to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I don't know what time is your last meal, and it's possible that your kidney is on its own cycle. So most of us, it's a, most regular people who are going to bed say at 10 or 11, not young adults but middle-aged people, they typically wake up around in the morning and then they go to pee. So maybe since you're going to bed at 2 and waking up at 10, and I would suspect that around 7 or 8 a.m. you're waking up to go to the bathroom,
Hmm.
because your
Yeah.
kidney may be in its own rhythm. And this is again, you can say that this is a telltale sign that your body rhythm, your brain rhythm is slightly out of sync with your kidney rhythm. And it's really hard to figure out how you can manage that. For example, if you're drinking a lot of water just 2 to 3 hours, within 2 hours before going to bed, then that will definitely trigger you to go to pee. And this is kind of a tricky challenge, because you're the first one who actually young person who has come up with this issue. Usually older people ask me because of obviously other problems they have.
Yeah.
um, but this is again, if you don't drink enough water, then your mouth becomes dry and then you wake up to sip little water. And you can sip little water and then go back to sleep if your mouth is dry. I don't see any difficulty in that. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I kind of hand waved this one because it's really hard to address this.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about sipping after a certain hour based on my own kidney circadian rhythm. So
Yeah.
for people that also have that issue, I guess after a certain point, maybe 7 p.m. or 8 p.m.,
Yeah.
they could focus on sipping and explain why sipping particularly is going to be helpful for your diminishing potential peeing. Is it, how does that work with the kidney? Is it just less activating?
Yeah, actually, kidney has a lot of other issues than just water intake. It's also detoxifying. maintaining blood pressure, and a lot of other stuff. And I think the sipping comment I might have put in Andy's podcast because we're talking about how to not to wake up too many times at night. We haven't done too much work on drinking in big bolus versus sipping a little bit of water, because as you can imagine, these experiments are very difficult to do in humans, and in mice it's very hard to water deprive them for many hours, and then because the metabolism rate is very different. But the bottom line, I think, was try to be rehydrated enough, sufficiently hydrated throughout the day. And then if you have this issue of going too many times to the bathroom, then maybe sipping a little bit of water 3 to 4 hours before your bedtime will help you reduce that chance. But I guess in your case, what I suspect is your kidney rhythms are very strong and your brain rhythms are strong, but they're not in sync. So that's why kidney is waking up to do its job, and your brain wants to sleep. So this
Yeah.
is a good example of they are going out of sync.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I get the sense the whole pattern here is that everything works better during the day,
Yeah,
everything regulates better,
yeah,
and you should try to front load as much as you can during the day, and then try to wind down everything from food, sleep, food, water, exercise. And
light.
exercise was interesting because you
Yeah.
talked about why exercising early in the morning, like the first thing, isn't actually better than earlier in the afternoon or in the evening. Why is that the case?
Well, there are many studies that are done showing that exercise late in the afternoon are beneficial for many reasons. And it started with, so it started, I think there are some observations in 80s showing that in NFL players, when they fly across the US and play Monday night football, then West Coast team that flies to East Coast and plays Monday night football, then they're actually in late afternoon time based on their jet lag, whereas the local team is a little bit late in the night. And the odd of beating the East Coast team on their home turf was slightly higher. And that led to the, so those who are into sports betting, they can use this information for sports betting. But since then, the focus then went why, and then people realize that late in the afternoon, a body core body temperature is pretty good, so it is high, not like early in the morning when it's a little bit cooler. So when your core body temperature is high, your blood circulation is high, your blood pressure is a little bit higher, and your muscle flexibility is higher, so you don't need too much warm up. And in that way, your athletic performance becomes much better. At the same time, your brain is not sleepier, so it's more active. It had enough food throughout the day, so the motor coordination is much better. Your risk for falling or injury is reduced. And then in the late afternoon, what happens is, since our pancreas slows down, then muscle can drive insulin, sorry, muscle can drive glucose uptake independent of insulin. So in that way, having activity late in the afternoon, early evening actually helps to reduce blood glucose much better than the same exercise early in the morning. And those studies were done a few years ago, and now there are some repeat studies showing similar trend. And blood pressure also is much better regulated by late afternoon exercise than the same exercise in the morning. Having said that, any exercise is much better than no exercise. So if you are pressed for time, just go and do exercise whenever you can. But if you have the luxury of choosing morning versus evening, then maybe you can try late afternoon exercise.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're the first person that I actually heard say that specifically in terms of the importance of doing it early in the afternoon, but it makes sense based on the regulation of our glucose levels. Um, so we talked about food, exercise, light, sleep as the major dominoes for regulating our circadian cues that often people overlook. Is there anything underrated that people, based on your research, that people are overlooking, perhaps like temperature of where we live or social interactions that you found in your research that may not be major dominoes, but are still important factors for our overall health?
I mean, temperature, we lived for most part of human history, we lived in natural temperature. So that means we experienced a high daytime temperature and low nighttime temperature. But in modern days, we're at constant temperature. And there is not much study on whether temperature cycles are better than no cycling and being in a constant temperature. But at the same time, there's also studies showing that higher temperature disrupts our sleep, and many people can attest to that. It's those who are used to sleeping in air-conditioned rooms in summer days within 20 degrees north or 25-degree north and south of the equator, then they know that it's really hard to fall asleep during summertime. So temperature does have some effect, and then social interaction also has a strong effect because social interaction can entrain our circadian rhythm to some extent. So that means having regular outing or having regular conversation with family and family time or friends time also helps us to entrain our circadian rhythm or at least release stress and have better sleep.
Mm. So, last question for you is, from all of the tips and ways of optimizing our health and circadian rhythms that we've talked about, if you were to break down what a ideal, maybe ambitiously perfect circadian day from the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep, assuming exercise, assuming that we're eating 3 meals a day and all that stuff, how would you break that down at a high level? You don't have to go super specific, but
Mhm.
from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, how would you personally do that?
Yeah, actually, what you're saying is you're saying most of us say that the day begins the time we wake up, but actually, the day begins when you went to bed last night. So I would say from going to bed last night to going to bed tonight, what you should be doing.
Mm,
So,
interesting. Yeah.
because when you go to bed last night determines how well you will sleep, when you will wake up, and how refreshed you will feel in the morning. So that's why I said the day begins the night before. So try to go to bed at a consistent time and be in bed for 8 hours. So schedule your 8 hours in bedtime. And because during sleep, your brain detoxifies, you restore or store memories, you also store whatever you have learned, and many of your growth hormones and repair process both in the brain and outside the brain in the body happens during our sleep. So that's why setting aside 8 hours in bed consistently is extremely important. This is the time when you're sending your car to the garage for repair every single day. Then after waking up, try to wait for at least an hour or two before your first bite, because that's when your cortisol level is pretty high, your melatonin is halfway down. If you're not taking any melatonin supplement, then having this high cortisol and significant amount of melatonin can disrupt glucose regulation. So that's why 1 to 2 hours waiting after waking up is a good idea. And then third, after again, just like going to bed at a consistent time, try to be consistent in your first meal that you eat, or breaking your fast, that breakfast, because just like light resets our brain clock, food resets the body clock every single day. So be consistent with your breakfast time and try to eat all your food and energy containing beverages within 8, 9, 10, or maximum 12 hours. And because during this feeding cycle, many research have shown that maintaining a consistent eating window of less than 12 hours and fasting for 12 or more, ideally 14 hours or so for adults, helps us restore our circadian rhythm, improve metabolism, reduce inflammation, and also get better night's sleep. And then the next one is try to go outdoor for and to get some daylight roughly for an hour, and also combine that with activity, some physical activity, ideally late in the afternoon, but any time of the day is good enough. And then the next one is as the evening comes in, you should have your last meal at least 2 3 hours before your bedtime. So that means for the last 2 to 3 hours before bedtime, there should be no food and no bright light. You can dim down your light so that you can build up the melatonin that you deserve for better night's sleep.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And then I guess exercise, ideally, if you can, if you have the flexibility to, in the middle of the day, in the early afternoons to
Yeah,
the evening.
late afternoon if you have the flexibility. Otherwise, any time of the day is
Great.
good.
Great. Yeah. I think you have a little chart
Yeah.
from the day to night on TED. So I'm gonna make sure I put that in for people
Yeah.
to see. Well, Sachin, thank you so much for sharing all the insightful, you know, research and information for people to be able to optimize the circadian rhythm. I want to make sure people check out your book, the Circadian Code: Lose Weight, Supercharge Your Energy, and Transform Your Health from Morning to Midnight. Longevity book. We're going to have that linked below. Where else can we direct people to, or to learn more about you?
Yeah, we also have an academic app called mycircadianclock.org, so people can learn more on the website. And the app is also free. It's academic, so that means we don't sell anything, we don't give any advertisement, or we don't sell people's data to third parties. So we use entirely to figure out how people of different profession, different age, different location, how they habitually eat and sleep. And after 2 weeks, we also give them enough guidance to get on their personal journey on optimizing their circadian rhythm.
Beautiful. All right. We'll have those linked below. Thank you, Sachin. And thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you, and have a perfect circadian day.